Jordan Poole, I mean, I'm going to be mean now, but I think he's a Cohen era player. I think he gets you 20 points and he looks flashy as hell and looks great. And everyone's like, oh, look at that, double crossover, but he gives up 30 on the other end. And I'm like, I'm so sick of watching players like that. I don't want to watch them anymore. So that's just my personal beef. Next year. But the problem then is, it's the Jordan Poole conversation. And
let's talk about that now, Patrick. Let's get into this.
I think there is no, honestly, I mean, you can't say, but I cannot see a way that Jordan Poole is on the Warriors next season. I think it's obvious he doesn't want to be there. And why would you, when someone punches you in the face in practice, it gets leaked, so you get doubly humiliated. Basically, nothing happens to that person. You've already got a ring. You've already got a bunch of money guaranteed. Why come back? Why would you want to be in that workplace? So he doesn't want, I can't, but I wouldn't think he actually really deep down, he quite like a fresh start, I would imagine, and being able to be the man in another place. And I think the Warriors, he's their only player. They've got to get rid of that contract because of I think if they had gone further and, been better, there are things you could do around the edges to make it a bit more palatable, the luxury tax bill for next season. But I think now, you've got it in the middle of the round that you need changes. He's the one you can move.
Yeah, well, and the three of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying the one problem with that is the other 29 teams also saw this playoffs. So like his trade value is much lower, I would imagine, but you got to think someone will take a flyer on a young, creative, dynamic guard potentially with some potential who is locked up under contract for 4 years. Because that's actually, I think, we look at that and we think, oh, that's a toxic contract. But like teams where they're not particularly successful in free agency, that's actually probably an asset that's quite useful to them. So I think, I expect him to be the ballast in any trade to improve the depth on this team.
So here are my thoughts. Is one of the things that the three of us has talked about multiple times is, once the Kevin Durant fallout happened, the front office has actually done pretty good at making the jump from D'Lo to Wiggins. And yes, Daniel, you were still very right about Wiggins. And at the same time, though, they've had to make so many gambles to make it happen, right? You're way down on your list of contingencies, right? You're way down the tiers now. They're down on the edge of, we had to do this because this other thing that we had to do happened, and like we wouldn't have been there if this other thing wouldn't have happened. Well, dumping James Wiseman in a last minute scramble to bring back the guy that you just let walk in the previous offseason is a huge problem. And now, not just because like, wow, this team really could have used an athletic dude who could just like catch the ball and dunk it. Like, but the other issue that I'm thinking about these days is, dude, are they going to have to include Kuminga now or Moody to move Poole? Like you're saying, like people just watch the playoffs. Like this kid is now on an enormous contract, and like I think maybe there will be some traction talking about how his teammate punched him in the face. But I also think there's a problem of like there's a lot of really bad tape on this guy this year. Like, not playing defense properly and like not being dialed in, and his Gumby arms and leg turnovers are like just so hard on the eyes. This is the concern for me. The off season is like it's pretty clear that this is what they need to do, and I think that Patrick's right. Is like everybody knows it around the league, and I just wonder now at the opportunity cost of dumping Wiseman, because now you don't really have any other like filler guys to move besides Poole, and Poole's value is a little bit low right now, so you might have to now again move some of the young guys, which might not be a bad thing, but if you would have admitted this earlier and used your resources better, it could have gone much more smoothly. But it's Bob Myers, maybe he pulls another miracle out and I'm end up, my third worst take.
Well, I think that's where it's strange because you have the idea of where you're getting these young guys on purpose. You got the young guys, you had the lottery picks on purpose. Like that was the whole plan. We want the young guys, we want the youth, we want them to learn under these legends and slowly take over in a very Spursian fashion. And I remember Draymond Green said it when it happens, we've never seen it before. To see the way that again, I have no idea what the dynamics in the locker room are, but to see how willing they were to Jason Wiseman, how they played Kuminga and then didn't play him in the playoffs. And then you have Moses Moody, who got some run, but played in the regular season. Jordan Poole's part of that young core too. So for him, getting probably the most playing time out of that young nucleus, and for him to seem so out of whack and so dispirited just 1 year after balling out, you know what I mean, in the playoffs, I don't think his trade value is that low. Because if you look at his two different playoff runs, he had one playoff run where it was like, is he the next Steph Curry? That was like the actual talk. And then he had a bad playoff run, and he's only 23. So I think there'd be lots of teams who are willing to take a flyer on Jordan Poole for sure, and just chalk it up to maybe a bad situation. But in terms of like, if the conversation is like, you know what, guys, everybody's under contract, we're bringing you back next year, we just won a championship, make it work. I think the thing that is surprising to me is that we don't seem, after all these years, to have an athletic big who can affect the game. And we've been trying to get this guy for like 10 years. Well, actually, if you look at the Warriors history, probably 40 years. We've been looking for this guy.
Every team has.
But the Warriors have changed the game. So you don't need that anymore, right? They won 4 titles without that.
Really? Because last night when Anthony Davis was dominating us, it looked like we needed it pretty badly.
Well, you need a guy as good as Anthony Davis. You don't need James Wiseman out there necessarily getting dunked on. But I'm in between you two guys.
They've changed the whole. I mean, part of the problem here, I think, is the revolution has devoured itself. Right? You're talking about our shooters off. Like in 2015-16, they were the first team ever to shoot 1,000 or to hit 1,000 threes. Now, like half the teams in the league are doing this. So, like, and the problem they've got is they haven't diversified it enough in terms of they've gone too far the other way now, and they've unbalanced their offense, I think. And I just like. Yeah, we had this conversation when they drafted James Wiseman, and I famously was like on the Obi Toppin Express, and I said, you know what, he played some decent playoff minutes. They probably could have used him, right? But anyway, let's leave. But like, you know, the point was like when they win, when they go small, and they go small and they go fast, and the problem they've got is they didn't have, you know, actually where they did quite well in this series, where Gary Payton was inserted and you had the 5, you know, with Gary Payton as the 5th guy. I don't think so. I think that's the way. And in game 4 that they almost won, and in game 5 they did win, they just put Anthony Davis in the pick and roll every single time. And so I feel like this. I don't see that. That's the problem with them. To be honest, I think they keep trying.
Andrew Bogut, Zaza Pachulia, JaVale McGee.
You need some beef, right?
Where are those guys on this roster right now?
Looney's the guy, right? But no, I mean, Andrew Bogut is like classic. He wasn't a kind of athlete. You need IQ to play in this system, and that's been the problem. They haven't found the right people. Like last season, Otto Porter was that's the big difference in terms of the roster. That and how did they win the finals? They put Otto Porter into the starting lineup. They stretched forward
so much
with Jamal Green, and obviously he's not as good, so it didn't work. So like my question really is, and this is where I think on the 2 timelines thing, I get a little frustrated about it, because either like you're totally in favor of keeping all the youth, you're totally in favor of trading all the youth, and everything you do is like a referendum on either of them. There's some middle ground here, right? So why can't Jonathan Kuminga, you know, who has shot reasonably well from 3, I'm not saying develop into a 40% 3-point shooter, but spend this summer maximizing a jump shot, so at least people are guarded out there, and then he's the Otto Porter guy, and like I don't think you have to. My view is if you get 2 out of 3 lottery picks who work out, you've done really well. Ask Orlando Magic or, you know, Charlotte Hornets or any of these teams who've been rubbish for years. You know, don't want to be rude about anyone, but you know, you have multiple high picks. You don't hit much, and so I'm not too worried about Wiseman being a miss and then them having to unwind that. I think they were right to try. Once they had him on the roster, you know, they had to try this season, and the salary cap math was the salary cap math, so you couldn't match the Payton contract. But when it didn't work, I think they were right to reverse it. And I do think going into this season, you know, they found something with Moody. He's like he can play in high leverage playoff games quite clearly, so that's not a problem. The big question mark is like Kuminga. Can he get to a point where Kerr can trust him in those games, because it was extremely frustrating watching how he was handled this year in terms of he played well and then suddenly was just out and didn't make any kind of dent. And just one thing, just going back to what you're saying, Debbie, with Jordan Poole, I mean, the one thing they have got is they've got most of their picks. So it's only next year where they don't have a pick. So they can, they've got this year's pick. You can't do back to back, but they can pick someone and then trade them. And then, they can trade from 26, 28 pick swaps.
Yeah.
Like, look at what got Drew Holiday, for example, out of New Orleans. I'm not saying there's anyone near that good available, but it was basically a bad contract and a bunch of picks. That's the game with Jordan Poole. You're hoping that someone bets on the upside, so you don't have to put as many bad picks into the.
So you're done with JP. You're done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I'm ambivalent. I personally think, like, if they, like, Nate sent a we were sort of talking about this in our writers Slack chat, and Nate sent a note that was pretty long, but at the end he's like, basically, I think I'm comfortable with whatever happens. And it was like the shrug emoji. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I just have so much uncertainty about what's going to actually make this all work versus what's not. We keep talking about the Spurs dynasty, but like, that was built on the generosity of their core players intentionally taking less money so that they could play on the bench. And I feel like players like Draymond Green and Klay Thompson look at the valuation of the Warriors franchise and know what real wealth looks like from the people that own this team, and are going to be like, fuck you. Like, you guys can definitely afford to pay everybody, and you can totally eat that salary cap math. Like, this is what is building franchise value. Like, this is why your company is worth whatever $1 billion now. Like, yes, you made this state-of-the-art stadium with a bunch of retail space that may or may not be occupied. The real value here, though, I don't think that we have the players like Manu, like, imagine what a jump it would be for Klay Thompson, who is a very cool guy, my favorite Warrior of all time. But just imagine what a philosophical jump it would be for him spending the entire season being like, no, fuck you. I'm going to shoot my way back into greatness. Efficiency, I got it in me. Don't worry about it. What a flip it would be for him to come back to work like 3 months later and be like, guys, you know what? I just want you to know, for your planning purposes, like, I'll take the vet minimum. I'll come off the bench for the next 3 years. That's what I want. That's how we're going to be successful, and that will bring me the greatest joy.
I mean, he did shoot 41% from downtown this year. I don't know if you're going to get that. He did shoot 41% from deep. I don't know if you're going to get Klay Thompson to stop shooting the ball.
Klay was 14 of 56 from the field over the last 4 games, 3 of 19 in the closer. Like, I mean, yes, I know we're talking about big sample size, and Klay does get nuclear hot. But I'm just saying that as we look at ways to fix this roster, the Spurs model is banking on exactly but Klay and Draymond intentionally deciding that they want to take not just less money, not like a little Kevin Durant haircut, but like significantly less money. Because I think one thing we saw with the Lakers is like the margins kind of matter a little bit. Like Hachimura, like I can't believe Kuminga didn't outplay him in the series, but the truth is that he didn't. And you're putting guys like JaMychal Green out there, or Lamb, and there's just too many of these minimum contract players out there because we're so top heavy with our contracts. And I still think that that's really the elephant in the room here. Like, if you're going to fill up the roster with drags, you're going to have to live with it. And, the Lakers traded some picks and a dead contract and got significantly better at the trade deadline. And I think that sort of was one of the big differences during this series. It's like they had role players that blew up in games, and the Warriors didn't.
Well, I look at the top 7 or 8 guys from the Lakers and top 8 from the Warriors. On paper, I'd probably put the Warriors top 8.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at roster for roster, I would look at that and be like, Austin Reeves, Dennis Schroeder, Lonnie Walker. They're the top 8.
Austin Reeves and Ronnie Walker both cooked us.
And
Exactly.
they destroyed us. So that's what I'm wondering. we're saying that the Warriors, obviously greater than the sum of their parts. There are some teams I would look at and be like, okay, on paper, it's gonna be tough, it's gonna be a problem. I did not see that with the Lakers. I mean, we're talking about LeBron, Anthony Davis, D'Lo, Austin Reeves, Dennis Schroeder, Lonnie Walker, Rui Hachimura. Like, that's where I go back to what Patrick said about the chemistry, and maybe just wear and tear. But Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, Looney, Poole, GP2, DiVincenzo. That's before you even get to Moody, Kuminga, all those guys down there. You would have thought that we would have done a much better job, which is why even the games we tricked off, like game 1, we could have won. Game 4, we should have won. Like, that's why I'm saying, like, that I don't feel
series. You win game 4, it's a completely different series, though.
That's what I'm saying. Like, we're like a couple terrible shot decisions or turnovers away from like winning the series. That's why I'm saying the idea of like ship people out, trade them, seems a little weird for me, because I'm not sure exactly what the issue is in terms of why do the guys that we know can perform better than this, why are they not performing better? You know what I mean?
Well, what would you do? Would you run it back?
Well, that's the thing. I don't know what the chemistry is right now. That's the thing that seemed like kind of absent from this Warriors team. It seemed like the Warriors were like winning in spite of chemistry. Kind of reminded me of the Kevin Durant last year that we had, where it was like, yeah, our chemistry sucks. Who cares? And it was like, damn, they're that good. Like, they don't need chemistry. This year kind of felt that way for various reasons. Obviously, Wiggins leaving, but the young guys versus the older guys dynamic, that played out in a way that was much weirder than I expected. I just assumed you got Iguodala, Livingston, Zaza, and Steve Kerr, all these guys here. I mean, this is supposed to be one of like the choir boy franchises. And so for the young guys to feel rubbed so wrong in a situation, that's why I'm wondering, like, what's happening behind the scenes where it can't just be I'm not getting enough playing time or shots like that. I think there's something where they feel like they're actually actively being held back from what they believe they can be.
You look at Kerr's minute distribution. I like Jonathan Kuminga being unhappy about his role in the playoffs. I'm unhappy about his role. It's like he should be unhappy about his role in the playoffs. So like Kerr, I think Kerr did not coach a great season. I have to say, I'm like Steve Kerr has won 4 championships with this team. I'm not going to be like out there calling for his head or anything like that. That's crazy. But like he did not coach a good year. He's not. I think he is not a brilliant coach for young players because he's so veteran heavy that you really got to push the envelope and like really tick the right boxes for him, and then he'll put you in and he'll play you. But I think a couple of things. So one thing for me that I feel really mattered in terms of the chemistry was not like last off season. The money is what it is, right? So you weren't going to maintain a load of people, but what you don't have is like the mid-tier level of veterans. So if you think about what you're effectively asking Steph, Clay, and Draymond to do all the heavy lifting of the whole team, and then all the emotional baggage in the locker room and all the stuff with young kids, in NBA terms, who want more time, who might, feel they won a championship, they're part of this, and, getting a bit, ahead of the game really a little bit. And I think that really missed. So, I go back to the offseason. I know this sounds mad, but I just wonder if they just kept Juan Toscano-Anderson and Damian Lee on the roster, 2 guys who had to scrape for every single NBA minute that they had, and just had a bit more stability in that locker room, a few more kind of senior voices that were just like, took the pressure off Steph, Clay, and Dre. Maybe they did block the development minutes, but it gave you the example of how not just how hard you have to work, how you have to work to get into the rotation. That might have helped. So I think when you think about the next roster for next year, you have to think about, well, who are those other veteran voices? Because Iguodala was in many ways too old, like an assistant coach when he's 38, 39, and he's not playing.
Well, he's not playing. I think it's a big part.
You've got to have people who are still in that space. So I think that's really important. But I do think in terms of the money, I mean, I think let's see what happens this offseason. I don't think Draymond Green's going to. I think Draymond Green's. I've said for a long time, every time I talk about it, I think he will sign a deal quite like Wiggins' deal, to be honest, and that will be a good deal for him, years versus dollars. And the report that came out last night was that both him and the Warriors are kind of talking about, going to talk about it, and things look favourable there, and they're going to talk to Clay about a deal as well, and a discount. And it doesn't need to be a veteran discount because the cap is the TV money is going to come in the cap. It goes up by 10. It'll go up by no more than 10% each year, but that'll be quite, it'll be quite a lot. And so pretty quickly you can start to see a way. It's like this next year is a big problem in terms of money, but you can start to see a way that eases out. And then I think to your point, you kind of have to this is why you can't jettison all the youth, actually, because they're the young, cost-controlled contracts. So for another 2 years, you've got Moody and Kuminga. Now, could you? They were almost, in discussions about OG Anunoby at the trade deadline involving Kuminga. Like, he's pretty good. Well, I wouldn't. I don't think I would want to do that, because I think Kuminga in 3 years' time will be better than Anunoby. But like, for the next 2, if you just say, right, sod it, 2 years, that we're maximizing Steph's window, you go and make that trade now, and Poole and Kuminga, and you bring back Anunoby, and you've got a really good 3-and-D kind of wing who's up and coming there. So like, there's options to improve it, and I don't think you need like Clay to take a vitamin. I think you need Clay to take a chill pill and just like maybe not come off the bench, but maybe like set his feet and play. But he did that for half the season. For the latter half of the season, he looked much more calm and much more in control. And then in the playoffs, it kind of all went off the rails again. And I mean, I keep coming back to. I think they do. The reason I think you've got to trade Jordan Poole is because you need some upgrades on the roster, and that's probably the only way you're going to do it, even with his trade value being tanked. That contract, bunch of picks, you might get something back that you can build with. But I think actually better chemistry will go a long way. Better chemistry, better coaching. Some development. You've still got another summer of development for Moody and Kuminga as well. If you Kuminga around, so can you get Clay into a position? I think the frustrating thing is, like, if you talk about what kind of player do you need, you actually kind of need Jordan Poole from last year's playoffs with maybe a bit better defense, right? You need someone who can get into the teeth of defense. But I will say one thing about the reason I'm kind of out on Poole. Well, a number of reasons, but one of them is his playoffs were good. But if you look at where the impact was, it was the first few games of a series. Then he got scouted out, and he didn't look so good. And you saw in the finals, they'd scouted him more and he wasn't as effective. But like, that Denver series, really good in the first few days. Then they scouted him out and shut him down, and he was ineffective. Same with Memphis. And so I think he was got the benefit of a rising tide. I think they've overpaid him. I thought at the time they paid him too much money. If he'd gone to restricted free agency, I don't think he'd get that contract quite like that. But I don't think it's so horrible with the cap going up that you can't trade it when you attach some picks to it and get something back that you can use.
Yeah, well, he had some bad optics, but he also had some very good optics. You know what I mean? Like, I think, and this is what Daniel was saying, is like, there's going to be somebody in these rooms, most likely, who can have some retort for people who are like, Poole, that guy's not worth anything. They'll be like, well, I don't know. Like, if your teammate punched you in the face and you had a weird year, like, how bad is it that you had, 3 or 4 weeks worth of bad games when it mattered? And this is why when we were sending out the agenda notes for this talk today, one of the things I wanted to mention is like, that Bob Myers deal is going to be a really, it's the first shoe that's going to drop in the offseason, I think, because of the timing. He does come up later, I believe, but they probably want to resolve that before the draft stuff comes around. I believe Anthony Slater pointed that out. So, like end of June-ish, mid-June-ish, that we might know about Bob Myers relatively quickly. And this is the kind of stuff that scares me when Joe Lacob's talk about light years. Is like, they did great with identifying Myers and getting the team to this point. And maybe it's because I'm scarred from remembering him as a high pick that didn't really pan out for the Warriors. But like, dude, if you put Mike Dunleavy Jr. in charge of this team, I lose a lot of trust in the front office's like ability to manage like conversations and egos and like complicated questions around stuff like this. Like, Myers has like a gravitas to him, and the players all talk about it. So, it's going to be really interesting. The Warriors have some very big choices, and one of the things that I always like to think about when you're talking about like consideration of ways forward or ways to resolve a problem is the no action option. Like, what if they do sort of run it back, bring back Myers, flop out some of those edge pieces? Like, can you do better than JaMychal Green and Lamb? Like, I don't know, maybe, but you could probably get real close. And then again, like a full season for Kuminga and Moody, and like maybe Poole just needs some time away from the team, or him and Draymond need to go get drunk together or something. Like, there's ways to fix stuff without like ripping it all apart. But these are some really big conversations to have. And I assume the Warriors have been having them, but like now it's time to really like make the moves. I'm really curious to know how it's going to go.
Well, that's where I'm interested because the margins are so thin. We talked about how they could have. There's a world we clearly see where they beat the Lakers in like 5 games. We see it pretty clearly, right? Doesn't take anything away from reality. I don't sign those delusional ass Cavs fans back in the day, but I look at who's left. I look at Nuggets. They have Jokic. I look at the Heat. Bam. I look at Philly. Got Embiid. There's a world where these Giants are not being played off the floor. They're staying on the floor and they're balling. I'm wondering, is there a world where instead of being like, hey, Klay Thompson, you need better shot selection, it's like, what if we had a guy who can just get the rebound when Klay misses it and dunk on everybody for round one? Like, that'd be awesome. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many different parts of this team that I think are just going to be the way they are just because they've been doing it for so long. I mean, Steph, Klay, and Poole are going to jack. But you saw Looney, a guy who with no vertical, getting 20 boards a game. If he could put those shots back up with regularity, I think that for me, I feel like as much as I love playing small and the aspects are great there, the frustrating part is now when you're playing small and now it's the end of, I believe, game 4. And the Warriors are like, the best case scenario is Steph Curry hunt out Anthony Davis. And you're like, oh my God, your best case scenario is hunting out Anthony Davis? Like, that's what you're going for. And now Steph is like, crossover. I can't get past him. Now he has to shoot a contested 25-footer, gets the ball back, and he's in the same position again. And this is your move. This is your offense. Steph, attack Anthony Davis. And I love that as an arrogant Warriors fan. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, God damn. What an insane strategy, which, according to Synergy, works out pretty well. But once in the fourth quarter, and that's when you're going little man versus giant, small ball for the win. As we're seeing, it's not a high percentage in the way that you look at when Anthony Davis just falls into a foul, gets a layup. LeBron James buries his elbow into your chest, cracks your sternum, gets a layup, a foul, and one. Now they're shooting free throws, and the margin's changing. That's the way you beat small ball. You just beat them in foul trouble and hope they don't hit threes.
Yeah, this is what Charles Barkley's been saying the whole there's like an inherent event, and this is why Kevin Durant gets so much love in the sort of like GOAT rankings. Even though Steph is like, all of his numbers are better except for probably rebounding, right? Like, he's probably a better rebounder than Kevin Durant. But and one of the things that Patrick mentioned earlier that sort of struck me is like, when Kerr came in, he really revolutionized the Warriors system, right? And Steph and Klay and Dre were there to sort of lift it into something really amazing that's gained a lot of traction. Well, I think Kerr, not that he's out of ideas necessarily, but he's very committed to certain philosophies, much like Phil Jackson and the Triangle, right? And the thing that brought Phil Jackson and the Triangle down is people kept like being like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," but like, what if I just took part of your idea and combined it with these other ideas and like have this new thing? And it's like that specifically is built to destroy your system. I think Kerr and the Warriors are getting around to that point where like, I don't know that they need to reinvent themselves necessarily, but they need to get a little bit more creative, I think, about what the new version of the Warriors system will look like with the players and personnel, not just the players and personnel that they have, but who they're going against. Because, the teams have done very good at like identifying like that Vanderbilt guy, like, 6'8", 7-foot arm span, sucks at offense, but it doesn't matter because you can't get around the damn guy. There's a lot more people that are in the NBA now that can like sort of gum up what the Warriors are trying to do with their team. And I don't think that Kerr's offense has really kept pace with the rate of change that the league has seen. And, it's not like archaic, it's only been a few years, but I feel like it's almost like a software thing where it's like just the pace of advancement as far as like the philosophy, the players, like the sort of gamesmanship of like flopping and getting players who are good at drawing fouls. Like Kerr hasn't done a lot, the Kerr offense hasn't caught up to a lot of these factors that are sort of defining the modern NBA now. We have some of that because of who we are as the Warriors, right? But we haven't modified it to tweak it to like keep pace with the changes, the evolutions.
De'Aaron Fox almost beat us on free throws. And all respect to De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox shouldn't be beating us.
But I mean, I think part of the problem here is actually it's the Clay problem. They've leaned more into the 3-pointer because they haven't had other pieces to do. So this season they've shot more threes than they've ever shot. And so the variance has been much higher, but they always had. And if you go back to the beginning, I mean, you had Andrew Bogut and Draymond Green, so you had that passing hub out of the high post. You had cutters, you had people getting shots at the rim all the time. They were never a particularly high free throw shooting team. It was particularly bad this year because they never were going to the rim. And the reason, there are two guys I think three guys I think now on the roster who could, who basically give you that. Gary Payton, who wasn't here for the first half of the season and was injured for the second half of the season, so he didn't get into the playoffs and he was still kind of coming back. But let's see what he looks like next season. But he shoots over 60% because he gets the rim all the time off cuts, and we just didn't have anyone who could do that. Why can't Kuminga be that version of Vanderbilt? Like he should be drawing free throws all over the place. He should be cutting to the rim. He should be getting, and then the third guy is Wiggins, who missed up more than half the season. So I also feel like taking a step back from this season, like Steph missed 30 games or something. Andrew Wiggins missed half the season. Peyton wasn't there for almost the entire season. Kuminga was kind of in and out. So those guys that do that, I think we actually do have them on the roster, but we probably need, and this is where I kind of do have some sympathy with what you're saying, Daniel. I think we do. There is a role for a big in this team. Like I think the problem is every time I try and place Kevon Looney just gobbles them up like a offensive. That guy is like immovable and brilliant. I love Kevon Looney; he's amazing. But you probably do need a third big, but you probably need someone who can shoot. Now, who knows?
Maybe someone can catch a damn lob.
Yeah. Well, I think you've got the guys. You've got Kuminga. You've got Peyton, you got invert the offense. That's the way you do, like the way the Warriors have done this really well with Bielitsa. He couldn't catch anything. Yeah, but he could pass and he could shoot, and he could, So I mean, look, if we could get Nikola Jokic, because let's be honest, if we got through this series, I don't know if we're beating that team. That team looks really like
swept. The Nuggets will swept us.
They are playing, and this is where I go back to the chemistry point. They are playing with a joy and a togetherness and a freshness that the Warriors did in 2014-15 and definitely weren't playing with this year. And we weren't playing with the desperation we were playing with in last year's playoffs, where we're just desperate people were thinking about other things and they weren't part of the same thing. But I think in terms of the tactics, I think we've got those pieces, except for, can we get, so in my mind, what the pieces we need a kind of guard who can get into the defense, but actually not be a complete turnstile on defense, which is what I think, because I think, Jordan Poole, I mean, I'm going to be mean now, but I think he's a Cohen era player. I think he gets you 20 points and he looks flashy as hell and looks great. And everyone's like, oh, look at that, double crossover, but he gives up 30 on the other end. And I'm like, I'm so sick of watching players like that. I don't want to watch them anymore. So that's just my personal beef.